Today, I want to tell you a story about failure and success. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author, but I wasn't always. In 2008, I remember getting married and being secretly terrified. Up until that point, my life had been fairly chaotic, and I was going into this new, exciting adventure with no skills, no earning potential, and no idea what I wanted to become in the future. And honestly, it didn't take long for a lot of my fears to be realized. The early years of my marriage were incredibly sweet in a lot of ways because my wife is awesome. But they were also really hard. I was working in a dead-end job, making just under the poverty line, and I was killing myself doing it. I was working really long hours to try to be able to afford life, and I didn't seem to be able to get any traction no matter what I did. And I remember being in that situation and not having any idea how to get out of it. My days all felt the same. I would wake up, usually really early in the morning, and I would go to work, and I would work for 10, 12, sometimes 16 hours, and then I would come home and I would be completely exhausted, and I would spend what little time I had to myself desperately trying to relax, either spending time with my wife or my friends, or more often than not, playing video games. And this situation just seemed to continue year after year after year. Any of the excitement that I had in those early years came from thinking to myself, well, if I just keep going, it's got to get better, right? But it didn't. And the craziest thing was I would look at my life and say, man, I feel like I have all of the pieces that I need for a happy life. I have a wonderful wife. I have great friends. I have an awesome community. And yet, every day, I just seem to get deeper and deeper into this swamp. It's really hard to describe the mess of feelings and disappointments and self-critiques that I had going on in my head at that time. But if you've ever been in a position where your life seems to just be sort of pressing in on you, and you've got all of these responsibilities, and you feel like you're just treading water, then you know exactly how I was feeling. I feel very fortunate that I didn't turn to anything particularly destructive during that time. But because I felt so out of control, because I felt like there was nothing I could do to change my circumstances, I spent all of my time running away from them, trying to do whatever I could to just sort of not have to deal with the difficult situations that I was in. And I remember waking up one morning to go to work after I had been married for like 4 or 5 years, and I was still in the same job. I wasn't making any progress. We had heaps of bills that we couldn't afford. My first daughter was about to be born. And I remember just sort of taking stock of my life and thinking to myself, man, this is not how I imagined it. This is not the exciting adventure that I thought I was embarking on. Me and my wife were fighting more. We were stressed because there wasn't any money. We were about to have a kid, and we just literally didn't know how we were going to make it. And I could look around and I could point at my situation and say, hey, the area we're living in is depressed. There are no other jobs for me to get. I don't have the skill set that I need to go and get a different job that's going to allow me to earn more. Our car just broke down, and we just don't have the money to buy a new one. Our house is literally falling apart around us, and we have no money to fix it. And when I say falling apart, I mean falling apart. One of the walls in the basement was literally caving in. And I just felt so completely trapped in that moment, in that situation. But I had no idea what to do. So I went to work. I did my shift, I came home, and I did the same thing that I would always do. I walked upstairs, I turned on my computer, and I sat down to play a video game. And don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with playing video games. But something absolutely crazy happened in that moment. I remember turning on my computer and staring at the screen, and the same loading screen that I saw every time I opened that game popped up. And I thought to myself, oh no, in 10 years, I'm going to be staring at exactly the same thing unless I make some sort of change. You know, in his play, No Exit, Jean-Paul Sartre says, hell is other people. And what he meant by that is that we are often trapped by the knowledge and expectations that other people put on us. We view ourselves through other people's lenses instead of looking at ourselves for who we truly are. And I think in a lot of ways he's right. We live in a hell of our own making. We often spend our days in ways and modes of thinking that are objectively false, rather than face the reality of our own weakness. But in that moment, I had this strange clarity, and it was so depressing, so incredibly depressing, that I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I decided that if I was going to suffer, because at that point my life felt like nothing but suffering, then I might as well suffer for something. See, I had been spending all of my time trying to avoid suffering. My life circumstances felt like they were weighing on me, pressing in on me. There were all of these things I didn't like about my life, but I treated them like they were all external. I didn't like my job, but I felt like I couldn't change it. I was frustrated with my relationship with my wife, but I felt like I couldn't change it. There were all of these different kinds of pressures pushing on me, and I felt like I couldn't change any of them. And the reality is that I couldn't actually change any of them. But what I could do is I could face them. I could face them head on instead of running away. And that moment started a journey. It was slow and it was agonizing, but step by step, I started walking forward. It didn't really come quickly. This wasn't a come to Jesus moment where all of a sudden my life turned around. But that was the inflection point. That was the starting point for what my life has become. I had to face the reality that I have very little control over my external circumstances or the things that happen to me. But I have ultimate responsibility for the way that I face the world, for the way that I respond to the things that happen. And so I started in whatever small ways I could, just trying to lean into that. In his book, Atomic Habits, James Clear has a really great quote. He writes, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become." You know, in that moment of staring at that loading screen, the only thing I wanted, the only type of person I wished to become was a person that wasn't so depressed, wasn't so sad, who wasn't suffering so much. I didn't have any grand ambition or lofty goal. I was tired. I was tired of suffering. I was tired of being the victim of my circumstances. I was tired of life happening to me. And like I said, I didn't make any drastic changes. I didn't all of a sudden become a new person overnight. That's not how it works. But I did start making small changes in my life, small progressive shifts in the way I thought about stuff, in the way that I related to other people. And all of those small changes added up. The main shift that I had was that I just decided, if I'm going to have to suffer anyways, I might as well suffer while making progress. If I'm going to spend my life as a failure, because that's how I thought of myself, then I'm at least going to fail in the right direction. It's like life had put this giant mountain in front of me, and I was so afraid of falling down while I climbed it that I just turned around and ran the other direction. But once I set my face towards the peak of that mountain, and I said, you know what? Doesn't matter how many times I fall down, life sucks anyways, so I'm just going to go. All of a sudden, my suffering had purpose. It had meaning. It wasn't just pointless. In 2015, I started writing. I started taking my thoughts and the stories that were in my head, and I started putting them down on paper and trying to put them together in a way that made sense and that other people might actually like to read. And for the next 3 years, I just kept writing. And I didn't write super consistently. I didn't write a lot. A few hundred words here or there. Maybe some days where I'd get up to like 1,000 words. But I just kept doing it. And I would start new stories and then I'd abandon them, and I'd start new stories and I'd abandon them. But the one thing that didn't change is that I kept going. I just kept walking. And at some point during those years, I put my stuff up online. And let me tell you, it was brutal. The feedback that I got was like gut-wrenching. I love telling stories. I love writing. But literally every comment I got was, "This is total garbage." And it hurt. It is hard to express how much those comments bothered me. But you know what? Instead of suffering for nothing, I was suffering for something. And that helped me keep going. That helped me just say, okay, I'm going to take the feedback and I'm going to try to get better. And then in 2018, something else happened. I got a comment on one of my stories. And I'm sure I've mentioned it on the channel before, but the comment effectively said, hey, this isn't very good, but there is a story inside of this that I would love to read. And it was like an explosion went off in my brain when I read that comment. All of these years, I had been suffering in order to try to climb the mountain. And I saw that comment and I knew I wasn't at the top of the mountain yet, but I was making progress. It was like a signpost halfway up the trail that said, keep going, the peak's this way. So I did. I kept going. In 2021, I quit my job and I started writing full-time. By that point, I had been able to earn enough with my books to completely replace my income as a sales manager, and I found myself not yet at the peak, but making more money than I ever thought possible doing something that I absolutely love. It's been a long road. It's been a hard road. There's been a lot of work and suffering along the way. But the fact that I get to wake up in the morning and do something that energizes me, that I absolutely love to do, that gets me all fired up, is incredible. And I never, in a million years, imagined that this would be possible. When we are in the grip of circumstances, when we're allowing the world to dictate to us who we are and what we can become, the only option we have is pointless suffering. But when we take stock of our weaknesses, when we face reality and say, you know what, if I'm going to suffer, I'm going to at least suffer for something. Life changes. We change. No matter who you are or what kind of situation you are in, change is possible. And not only is it possible, but if you set your face to flint and you start walking, it's going to come. I honestly don't know why when I woke up this morning, I felt like I had to tell this story. I hope that the telling of it helps you. I hope that as you listen to this, you are encouraged that just because the situation you're in is difficult, just because you're facing challenges in your life, it doesn't mean that you can't make progress. It doesn't mean you can't improve. And improving your life is probably going to take hard work, and it's probably going to take suffering, but that's okay. If we have to suffer, let's suffer for something.